I've always liked languages for as long as I can remember. An interesting little story is that when I was a very young girl, maybe 3 or 4 years old, I imagined that I had a Japanese friend, like a girl from Japan who was friends with me. And I would tell stories to my family about her. And you have to understand, well, you do understand, but everyone has to understand that in Moscow, having an imaginary Japanese friend is more unusual than, say, in Toronto or in New York, which are hugely multicultural cities where you can have all kinds of friends. In Moscow, it was like, wow, Japanese friend, why Japanese friend? And I imagined that she was teaching me Japanese, and I would pretend to speak in Japanese that my friend has taught me. And I remember, I don't really remember, that's something that I was told, that my grandfather asked, okay, how do you say boy in Japanese? And I blurted something out very fast. And okay, how do you say girl? I say something. How do you say this? How do you say that? And I had such a quick response, making some sounds, just pretending to speak in Japanese, that for a sec he actually doubted whether it was true. He talked to my parents and he was like, I don't get it. Is she really learning Japanese? Like, what's going on with the girl? And so my parents think that that was the earliest sort of indication that I was into languages without having formally learned anything yet, but I was already interested in exploring that, and I made up stories about learning language. But then later, the first language that I started to learn was English, because everyone has to learn English starting around age 7 or 8 in Moscow schools. And my grandmother, my mom's mom, Olga, she is actually an English teacher, a private English teacher, and she helped me. She was my first English teacher because I was sick and I missed the first week of class at school in my first academic year ever, and I felt like I was desperately behind, and I didn't know how to write my name in English letters, which was what we were learning at the time. And she was like, okay, sweetie, don't panic, I'll help you. And that's how I started with English. And then later on, I picked up French around the age of 9. My other grandmother, my dad's mom, her name was Жанна, which is a Russified version of kind of like Joan of Arc, Joan, Jeanne in French. So her name was Жанна. And she was a French teacher. So both of my grandmothers are language teachers. And so that grandmother, who was a French teacher, passed away when I was 9. And that kind of motivated me to start learning French, because I felt like that could be a way to stay connected to her. And I started learning French both at school, and my parents were able to find a private teacher to teach me. And she was a fantastic lady, a very interesting woman. She was very old. She was in her 80s, I believe. And she was also like a veteran of the war. And she... and her French was exceptional, and she was, despite having lived most of her life in the Soviet Union, which was obviously like a closed society, she was a very non-Soviet person, and she had this flair of a European lady when she would talk about French and French personalities, and I don't know, like Françoise Sagan and Jean-Paul Sartre or whatever. So she seemed like a person from there, even though she was not. And I learned a lot from her. And then I picked up German around the age of 14. I studied it with one of the teachers at our school in Moscow that we just talked about. Her name is Lydia Kogan. She's a fantastic German teacher, so I started with her. And then I moved to Canada. I had to drop German for a while because it was not offered at my high school, and I just focused on making my English fluent and continuing with French, because obviously French is the second official language in Canada. It's very important if you want to have good job prospects in Canada, but also if you just want to understand the country's heritage, it's good to know French. And then when I was admitted to the University of Toronto, where I currently go to school, I was, overjoyed because U of T offers so many languages, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna have the time of my life. I'll pick up German again. So I restarted my interrupted training in German, and I'm doing a German minor. And then I met my boyfriend in Berlin doing a summer German course there, and he is from Spain. And that's how I started learning Spanish, which is now my second minor. And then obviously that brings us to the sixth language, which is Yiddish, and which is how I'm here today. And so Yiddish was just a way to take another class for my German minor while at the same time learning the language of my ancestors. We've talked about my family history. Obviously, Yiddish was a big part of it. So that's how I added it to my repertoire.